Emanuele Francioni, founder of DUSK. Welcome.
It's great to be here.
Excellent. I would love to hear about DUSK and what you and the team are doing, but before we do so, do you mind telling us a little bit about you and how you got into crypto?
It's a very, very long story. It's a very interesting story because it highly depends on what you mean with crypto. I mean, if you're thinking about a decentralized system in which value and programmability is disintermediated, then I think I got into it as early as 2012. First of all, I was completely skeptic about it, and then I turned into a convert around 2014, 2015. I had the privilege of seeing the Ethereum ICO at that time unfolding, but if we are talking about what really empowers crypto to be decentralized and disintermediated, then my interest dates back to 1998, because crypto or any kind of decentralized system is based on the capability of reaching consensus among distributed network of peers, right? And so it happens that one of the problems that I have been working back then in avionics was the capability of reaching consensus among different kind of sensors deployed on an aircraft. And then you have something which is called the Byzantine or Byzantine, I'm never sure about the pronunciation of that thing, problem, when you have a sensor or a peer in this network that starts to say one thing to a peer and then say something else inconsistent with what it just told the peer to another peer. So this is a Byzantine behavior, so to speak. And in avionics, then this is a huge problem because you have hundreds of different sensors that are deployed on an aircraft, right? And they all need to talk with each other to a certain extent. And the capability of achieving consensus over what is the state of these sensors when they start to behave in a faulty way, then that is a very, very interesting problem to solve. So I started back then to try and sort that out. Of course, there wasn't really any kind of decentralization possible. There were different kind of amelioration that you could drive inside of such a system. But then when I first I've been reading the Bitcoin white paper, then I found it incredibly beautiful how the consensus was achieved, how a network, a decentralized network, could in fact achieve consensus without a staggering amount of messages going around in the network, right? And that is how I got sucked in. And then fast forward to 2018, I founded DUSK. Back then it was called DUSK Network. And then we have been all inspired by the famous movie, the Social Network, in which at some point there is one of the characters that says, "Drop the cleaner." Well, then we did the same thing. We dropped the network, but apparently without really achieving the same kind of degree of success. So DUSK, it was created around 2017, 2018. And initially, the reason why we created DUSK, it was because there were some features that were missing on Ethereum, right? So on programmable, on the capability of introducing programmable processes in a decentralized way. And these the main two features that were missing were privacy and compliance. And back then, it wasn't really, they weren't really must have, so to speak, because crypto was still, blockchain as a whole was still trying to find its own soul, trying to find the killer application, the killer use case. And to some extent, it still is. But back then, my thesis was that I actually wanted blockchain to be a useful technology. I wanted basically to improve and increase the actually to improve certain particular situation on the so-called real world.
Yeah.
And in the real world, then businesses are essentially just incomplete if
Hmm.
they do not tackle these two specific problems: privacy and compliance. And of course, in a centralized environment, these problems are actually much more approachable. They are not really seen as antithetic, whereas in a decentralized environment, they are. So back in 2018, then I created DUSK with a vision of introducing privacy and compliance into programmability. And then the vision evolved during the years. We were successful in tackling these two different requirements. But then the application surface was what we started to focus more and more, finding, like I said, finding basically a niche, finding a sector where blockchain could really solve problems, right?
Yeah.
And we found that in providing a new paradigm for creating a financial market infrastructure. A financial market infrastructure is essentially a platform, if you will, where different kind of operations that pertain to the purchase, trading, post-trading, clearance, and settlement of different kind of financial products is performed and is carried out. And by law, then these processes had traditionally or needed traditionally to be split among different kind of entities, primarily the venue, the exchange. That was especially here in Europe, but it is more or less like that also in other regions. A venue and a trading venue for this kind of financial products, regulated financial products, or regulated RWA, real world assets, then by law, the trading venue cannot do clearance. So it cannot clear transaction or the cash leg of the transaction. By law, it cannot settle transactions related, for instance, to securities. So securities like bonds, securities like equities, securities like ETFs, and so on. These need to be settled by a CSD, which stands for a central security deposit. And then you have a lot of different other actors, each of which they perform a certain function and they are responsible for that function. But a traditional financial market infrastructure is basically vertically oriented, vertically integrated, different kind of platforms that do not really talk to each other, and therefore you have leakage of value, leakage of information, and inefficiencies all the
Hmm.
way. So
And well,
that's
you've described the kind of I'd say the customer journey or the supply chain of real world assets, and we definitely want to get into that. I want to go back to your time in aviation, avionics. When the sensors don't talk to each other, or they talk to each other and they don't come to consensus, the potential outcome is death. Potential is for people.
Well,
Um,
it depends. It
it
depends what
depends.
kind of
Yeah.
sensors we are talking about. Of course, there, on avionics back then, because I didn't really keep up with the
Yeah.
industry, so it might very well be that now there are very innovative solutions. But essentially, then you can think of an aircraft to be a very very big track, right? So on a modern track, you still have the same kind of thing, the same kind
Hmm.
of structure, in which you have something which is called the CAN network, CANN network. I sort of forgot what it stands for, but it is essentially a bus where all the different kind of information travel, and then at some
Yeah.
point sensors suck what they need to suck, or what the information that they need at that particular point. And then you have different ways to achieving consensus, but pretty much the strategy back then was when there is a Byzantine fault that is detected, then the amount of messages that need to be exchanged is actually increases quite drastically.
Yeah.
So that at some point certain particular sensors start to talk to each other and they ask or rather they push on the CAN, on the CAN the information about the fact that they got some potentially wrong measurements. And at that particular point in time, then there are different kind of arbitration techniques.
What I wanted to get to was, having come from an industry where having the correct information of state is so important because people's lives are at risk. How did that help you approach blockchain and the development of DUSK? Because we're talking about an industry where the risk is very high if there's a mistake, the risk is very high.
Correct. I mean,
And with blockchain, it's a little bit different. But what did you learn that you brought to your entrepreneurship journey as you developed DUSK?
Okay, so keep in mind that my past in avionics, in air traffic control systems, because I've been working on both, is again quite outdated. I mean, I stopped working in that environment roughly in 2004. Then I joined TomTom. I was one of the director of research and development for TomTom, the navigation company.
But I guess I want to,
but
the
there
principles.
is something, but there is a principle there that actually I kind of brought with me, and that is the capability of working in very, very, very constrained environments. For instance, one of the technologies that are used in avionics, and I'm generalizing, but I do believe that it is still correct. The technology was very solid technology. I mean, we developed all the systems using ADA, which is a language from the 80s. And when you're coding in ADA, then you can forget a lot of stuff that nowadays are readily available for a lot of developers. I mean, forget things like garbage collection, forget things like having almost infinite memory at hand. You have a very constrained environment. It is deployed on specialized machines that you can think of like being incredibly constrained but practically invulnerable. You can probably hammer them literally and still they will keep working. Memory management is another thing that is done very, 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 very well in ADA, and it is incredibly efficient for what it does. It is a pain to do anything else. I mean, forget user user experience and these kind of things. But for physics engine and these kind of things, basically working in ADA or working on those kind of constraint environment is a little bit like trying to work on a virtualized machine. Why? Because a virtual machine, which stands at the very bottom of the stack of any kind of smart contract implementation, a virtualized machine, a virtual machine essentially is a constrained environment that is deployed on God knows what kind of machines. So you still need to have a certain you need to level the playing field a little bit for what concern memory constraint, for what concern performance and these kind of things. And you need to make damn sure that what is deployed there, doesn't matter what kind of machine it is using, it is still using the resources in a way that is consistent with all the rest of the machines that are part of that network. Now, we didn't have any kind of virtualization back then, but principle-wise, then you can think that it is a very similar philosophy in deployment. Also, that gave me a little bit of, to abuse a little bit of Latin, I would say forma mentis, which means, a way of thinking, directly from Latin, which is anything that gets deployed needs to have 99.9999999% of availability. That was in avionics, of course. In blockchain, we have completely different percentiles, but still, availability is incredibly important. And I've seen in my career, I've seen many people YOLOing deployment of very complex application, and we have been probably at fault to have been a little too careful, because it took us 6 years to deploy, or to deploy our mainnet, and we are still developing. There are still components of DUSK which we are working on, and we are going to deploy later this year to completely bring the network to commence.
Let's talk about that. So January 7th is when the DUSK mainnet launched, but before that, you and the team have been developing DUSK for the last 6 years, which tells me that you have been very thorough and careful in its development. And I appreciate that, because right now we're seeing many projects launching that are not as careful and could potentially put users and users' assets at risk. And it tells me also that being so careful and thorough can give the user more confidence. When they transact and when they do things on DUSK, they're going to be a lot safer. Let's talk about the DUSK features and offerings. For those that are not very familiar with DUSK, what could you tell them, and maybe make a contrast in terms of what DUSK is purpose built for, what applications are perfectly suited to deploy on DUSK, and what users can, why they should be thinking about DUSK in addition to other protocols they might be thinking about.
Right. So to understand DUSK, then we need to talk a little bit about the privacy and compliance feature, because that was the engine, or the idea that brought to life the entirety of the network, right? So to understand DUSK means to understand also back then in 2018 the fact that there wasn't really anyone that was working on privacy preserving smart contracts. Not only we try to work on privacy preserving smart contract, which at that time and still largely today is almost science fiction, we also wanted to introduce compliance into the stack. Now, what do I mean with compliance? Because compliance might mean a lot of different things. And when people are talking about compliance in a vacuum, then you can be sure that they don't really know what they are talking about. Compliance, you can talk about compliance when you're talking about a set of different rules. You can comply to certain particular rules. There isn't really any system that is compliant in general. Why? Because there are a certain set of rules that have been tackled, and some other rules that probably are even antithetic that haven't been tackled by that particular system. So that system is compliant with something and non-compliant with something else. In our case, compliance meant since the very beginning, because I always wanted to tackle real-world asset, it was compliant with the set of rules and regulations defined in the MiFID or MiFID II directive in Europe. What is the MiFID II directive in Europe? It is the regulation that regulate for a set of different kind of rules that need to be followed when issuing securities, when trading securities, when clearing and settling securities. So what we wanted to do was to be compliant to a general framework with, when we're talking about KYC, when we're talking about AML, so know your customer regulation, anti-money laundering regulation, GDPR regulation, so which that's regulate privacy and data transmission and whatnot, DORA compliance. These are general frameworks, so things that everybody needs to comply with in the business world. And then there are certain specific regulations that have got to do with the use case, the niche that you are attacking at that particular point in time. For us, compliance meant the capability of automating or encoding the satisfaction of certain particular rules that are generic, plus those defined in MiFID. So those that in fact need to be satisfied in order to be able to tackle certain particular use case as a financial market infrastructure. I'll give you very, very, probably trivial examples of what I'm talking about. But for instance, when we are talking about a blockchain, when we're talking about Bitcoin or Ether or any kind of a blockchain out there, then we are talking about transfer of different things, assets, tokens, value, what have you, but we are talking about transfer. In order to comply with MiFID, then we can no longer talk about transfer, which is essentially just a transfer of value from me to you, but we need to talk about transactions in which I am transferring value and you are accepting value, and your acceptance is explicit. Because if it is not explicit, then you cannot be accountable for that particular asset, which is the reason why in the real world you have notaries. Notaries essentially intermediate a certain a certain transaction between different kind of individuals, and normally this transaction pertains to two different transactors that are exchanging value. They are not transferring, they are exchanging value. So the capability of doing an exchange of value in a decentralized fashion is one of the things that you need to have there. Do you remember for instance, during the scandal of Tornado Cash, when Tornado Cash has been sanctioned by practically all governments in the Western Hemisphere, and then at some point somebody had the brilliant idea of sending sanctioned Tornado Cash tokens
to everybody.
To everybody. So, and there is no explicit acceptance of these things. So suddenly I have on my account, money that has been sent by sanction address. And this money, by the way, considering that is non-fungible, because you can, it's not like one of the difference between an account model and a UTXO model is the fact that you have certain unspent outputs, and you can redirect these unspent outputs, and you can, there is no you can actually keep all your funds non-commingled, right? So you can keep outputs completely separated. But on an account model, then everything is commingled, right? So you cannot say, "Hey, I'm not spending the sanction tokens. I'm spending these other ones which are legit." You cannot do that. You cannot prove that the tokens that you are spending at that particular point in time are not part of the sanction ones. You are essentially just one link on the chain of payments in which that is in the middle of a sanction address laundering, which is a huge problem, compliance-wise. And this is also the reason why DUSK had to create privacy-preserving transactions, privacy-preserving smart contracts, and compliancy, not on top of the account model, which essentially 99% of different kind of chains out there use, but based on something else, like an output model, also because an output model can also preserve privacy. Why? Well, simply because if you have an account, everything is linked to your account to prevent double spending. So there is a link. with an account.
So it's a hybrid UTXO but programmable.
Correct.
Got it.
So
Okay.
so in 2018, so we needed to introduce this kind of feature. So we couldn't really fork anything that was there. We couldn't even fork a consensus for a lot of different reasons. So in 2018, the only consensus that had fast finality or immediate statistical finality, if you will, was Tendermint, but that wasn't even done. Cosmos was still sort of an experiment. If I'm not mistaken, it was created during a hackathon on Ethereum in 2018. And so we had to, I had to, and I had a lot of fun doing it, but God, if I could just do stuff all over again, I would never embark in such an Herculean task. I had to create a consensus that had immediate finality, and that was based on proof of stake, that could work on a virtual machine that wasn't account based, but it was output based, that had privacy, that could work with privacy. Things that in retrospect just made my hair a little grayer during the time.
So we've established that when people talk about compliance, it's compliance to a set of very specific rules. And when you develop DUSK, the rules by which you develop compliance against were the specific rules in Europe. Is that correct?
We needed to, yeah, that is correct. We needed to create a system on top of which it was possible and very easy to deploy a certain transaction model that could in fact tackle that set of rules. This set of rules are not encoded in DUSK itself, because otherwise we would be too specific of a chain. So we would be probably more a colored coin, to use a very old reference. So, but we tackled immediately, and we took into consideration immediately the kind of standard, the kind of transaction model that we wanted to implement on top of our network, in order to satisfy all the different kind of use cases that we had in mind. So DUSK retains to this day its identity of a general purpose, privacy friendly layer 1, on top of which we are going to, and this is one of the things that we are working on at the moment, and is our immediate priority, in which we are deploying, on top of which we are deploying the standard in order to satisfy the MiFID II and the security regulation, and to encode the security regulation. This particular standard, we call it Zedger, which is also a transaction model. And it's a transaction model that has been born pretty much immediately. It's not really something that we developed or we thought about, just with the time.
Yeah. Let's talk about, because it DUSK is a general purpose general purpose layer 1 chain. But on top of it, let's call it a module that's very specific to complying to regulations in a specific geography, let's say Europe. And that makes sense. That kind of model makes sense, because in a world of a more modular versus monolithic approach, the general purpose layer 1, and on top of that, the compliance module for Europe makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about the benefits that does for DUSK. When you're very compliant to the regulations in Europe, what does that enable DUSK in terms of partnerships and features and offerings? What does that allow you to do?
Well, one of the main benefits is something that we unlocked and achieved practically almost immediately already in 2019. So we entered in a partnership which is very symbiotic. It's a symbiotic partnership with a stock exchange, with a regulated stock exchange, right? So Eden, that was a partnership, and we also we are also shareholders of that stock exchange. Now, our keen focus on compliance and our also knowledge of two worlds that do want to talk with each other. One is the DLT world, or the blockchain world, or the distributed ledger, however you want to call it. So very technologically driven, very dynamic, fresh, crypto, Web3, and all that. And on the other hand, the regulated environments, right? So fintech, which is at the same time, it's quite a weird sector, because at the same time it is very conservative, but at the same time it is very forward looking, because efficiency, the capability of shedding costs even to a 0.1% makes or breaks businesses that are $1 billion worth, right? So we have been, since our focus was on both, we could bridge these two worlds very well. When we are talking about regulators, when we're talking about licenses, these kind of things, acquiring a license is 80% education, 80% educating the regulators about the technology that you're using, and 20% about policies, about how you are bringing certain particular policies that have been there and have been proving effective for quite some time, how you keep them alive, how you can still satisfy them, how can you still fit inside of these. So in that scenario, our focus and also our stack just allowed us to engage in early conversation, to speak the language of regulators when we spoke with regulators, the language of issuers and fintech providers when we talk to them, and the language of innovation departments of different kind of regulated institutions at the same time. Because of that, we have been I think among the first protocols in the world that were cleared by a national bank. So the Dutch National Bank, the DNB, gave us clearance to own shares, to own equity in a regulated stock exchange. This was something that already happened in 2019. Now, since last year, we got even the go-ahead from the regulators not only to hold shares, but also to base the development and the restructuring of such stock exchange on our own technology. As a matter of fact, at that time, I also became the CTO of the stock exchange. I am, in fact, not only the CEO and founder of DUSK, I'm also the CTO of NTES, which is a stock exchange in the Netherlands, with whom we are pursuing the license to be able to use DLT, so to be able to use the DUSK ledger in order to do, post-trades services, in order to do clearance and settlements, in order to do issuance, tokenization, essentially need to bring the financial world and the financial market infrastructure natively on the blockchain. And I don't think that there is any other protocol out there that got a similar clearance from the regulators.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've met with several real-world asset protocols, and none of whom are at the stage that DUSK is in, with being very regulatory compliant and have these partnerships with highly regulated industries. And it shows that the progress that DUSK has made, and very difficult progress, because getting these licenses is not easy. Let's talk about how. I mean, you've shown us how difficult it is to become licensed. that the technology that DUSK has built is both it's a general purpose layer one, but also has a module or is very regulatory compliant to the specific set of rules in Europe, which enables DUSK to partner with highly regulated financial industries that that allows for the securitization, for the issuance, for the post trading settlement, the entire customer journey of a transaction, a financial transaction. When people talk about real world assets, DUSK is clearly at the very edge of this. It's probably the furthest ahead based on all the projects that I've interviewed. What are they getting wrong that DUSK is getting right?
So, in order to succeed as a crypto protocol, you need one of these three things. And this is something that I came to realize after a long time. You either have a lot of users, or you either have a lot of money, or you either have the best damn status that you can have. Now, when you have a lot of users, then institutions want to talk to you because they want your users. Fortunately, the cycle of adoption from regulated parties, it is so long that normally users don't stick around for a very, very long time. This is something that we have seen over and over again. There are protocols that are older age, and then at some point, their users migrate somewhere else, to the next shiny thing. If we take the example of meme coins, then this is probably to the extreme. I mean, one day everybody is on one meme, the next day is on something else. But this is true also for very convincing and very, very good protocols, right? If you have a hell of a lot of money, then institutions want to talk to you because essentially they want to access your liquidity. Now, the problem with having a lot of money is an intrinsic problem. It's an endogenous problem. It's not really exogenous; it's endogenous. If you have a protocol, if you are the founder of a protocol that has a treasury that is so big, at some point you are satiated. Who cares? I mean, you have billions, right? So why would you jump hoops in order to comply to this and that? It's much better, basically, to start throwing money at a lot of different applications, and then one is gonna stick. Why going the regulated route? That doesn't really make much sense. The third one is the most important one, which is status. Now, DUSK does not have status per se, but like I told you, we are very symbiotic in our relationship with a regulated entity. And a regulated entity like a stock exchange that has got an MTF license, and by the way, Ampex has got also another couple of licenses here and there. It is, in the financial world, it is the highest status that you can have. So when I am actually talking with other entities, I'm not talking as DUSK. I am talking as the CTO of Ampex. If I am sending out emails as a CTO of Ampex, then I will have a response to my email. I actually counted it within 2 or 3 hours on average, and sometimes a couple of days, sometimes after 5 minutes, but I always get an answer. When instead I started to message people as the CEO of DUSK, this technology provider, this great that has great technology, has probably the most advanced technology because we have been doing things that even Ethereum right now is adopting, right? So Poseidon hashing is something that Vitalik himself started to advocate for Ethereum Foundation to start adopting. It is one of these hashing algorithms, zero-knowledge friendly hashing algorithm that we created also together with Ethereum back in 2019, and we have been adopting in 2019. So after 6 years, then Ethereum is actually... So from a technological perspective, I seriously think that DUSK is probably top 10 in innovation. Hands down. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about technology. Nobody does. If I am going to compete with other projects on the base of how good my technology is and how bad the technology of some other protocols are, nobody will actually answer the phone. Nobody will reply to my email. Nobody cares. And it's actually, it makes perfect sense. I mean, the EVM is a can of worms. It's a dumpster fire. It is very ancient technology, and yet it is practically everywhere. It is very well known, right? So if I am starting to shield Rask as or a Dusk VM as the great VM that it is, because it allows to do stuff that you cannot do with the EVM, like for instance having natively having native access to a plethora of different kind of zero knowledge proof system, and being able to have confidential smart contracts. All these things, institutions don't care. Institutions don't really... You know what they care? What institutions care about? They care about this thing. If I am integrating your protocol, am I putting my license at risk? Who is guaranteeing to me that your protocol, which is so innovative, so great, will make me, will keep me safe in my policies? And if an audit happens, I can still do things that I have been doing, or that I've been showing to the auditors for 25 years. It's a huge risk, because if they lose the license for whatever reason, because I don't know, there is a leak in our stack, and therefore we start leaking information about the user, for instance, then these institutions, they lose the license. If they lose the license, they lose their business. It's not that they decrease their sales or something. No, they lose their business. $1 billion funds, $1 billion venues, exchanges, CSD, transfer agent, what have you, they lose the capability of actually just turning a profit for their own shareholders. So this is a huge risk. But if I am actually contacting them as one of the highest regulatory bodies in the Netherlands, saying, I am actually the CTO of a stock exchange, I want to integrate with you, but I want to do it through DUSK, then you can rest assured that I will get a reply. And the reply is yes more often than not. And this yes probably may come with, we need to do due diligence on the protocol first. And again, it's not that I am shortening the sales cycle too much, but at the same time, I actually have a shot. Mm-hmm. If instead I come as, I don't know, whatever kind of protocol that tokenized real estate, and I go to a stock exchange, or I go to a transfer agent, or I go to any kind of venue that treats securities, and I say, hey, I want you to list my product. And by the way, it's not their products, because somebody else is doing the tokenization. They are protocols. So those that do the tokenization in the end will have a lot of different protocols, because they do not want really to lock themselves with this or that. But I digress. So the venue will start to see to see all these different kind of risks. The compliant officer is going to barrage questions,
Mm.
and that, that even getting to that point is a huge success, because if you are getting to the no from the compliance officer, it means that at least they've been reading your email,
Yeah.
or that they have been considering doing something. So all these different kind of real world assets, what they are doing at this point in time, most of them, primary market. What is primary? Essentially the capability of issuing a financial product.
And that's where a lot of them are. They haven't gone up the supply chain. They're still at the stage of issuing the real world asset on chain.
But do you know why?
Uh, my guess is, and I haven't asked, but based on everything you've shared, it sounds like because they lack the relationships, number one, and also the regulatory worldview. They may not even know what regulations they need to comply against.
The actual answer is because they do not need any kind of regulatory compliance. Well, they need the basic regulatory compliance, but they do not need any particular license to issue. So if you wanted to issue an asset, I'm not talking about on-chain, off-chain, on an Excel sheet or on a piece of paper. If you want to issue a bond, you can do that. You just create a prospectus, you create an information memorandum if you actually are, if you don't really need to appeal to qualified investors, this kind of stuff, but you can issue. Anybody can. Any business has been issuing bonds, has been issuing unsecured loans since, the 18th century. So primary market doesn't really require, there isn't really any barrier, any license barrier. When you are going towards secondary market, now the story is completely different, because at that particular point in time, you need to deal with licensed entities that are going to go through practically any minutia that about, not really about your protocol, because also they will probably not even understand what the protocol does. And the capability, even for financial institutions, for people that have been working in financial institutions, to become a regulated entity with the right license to do anything on chain with DLT or something like that, even for them, it takes an average of 3 years. I mean, in Europe, there is 21X, which recently got the DLT TSS license, so it allows them to have a secondary market venue that also can use its DLT in order to do some post trade, some clearance and settlement using DLT. It took them 3 years.
Wow.
And these guys have been interfacing with BaFin, which are the regulatory bodies in Germany, with ESMA, which is the European regulatory bodies, and they have been brought there by Deutsche Bank, by essentially behemoth, absolute leaders in the financial market. Even for them, it took them 3 years to get that license. So you understand that basically everybody that is trying to get into the real world asset, the RWA train, then they better have a very symbiotic relationship, very advanced relationship with a certain licensed entity to be able to provide liquidity, to be able to provide a marketplace for these assets. And even in that case, it's going to be extremely hard. And this is also one of the things that that the strategy that we're pursuing, because at some point, and this some point is definitely something that is already happening, by the way, we as DUSK, I am going to any single RWA protocol out there, telling them, hey, do you want secondary market for your assets? well, you better basically integrate with DUSK, because that is when you have a shot. Because I can speak both languages. I speak both Web3 and compliance language.
Yeah, it sounds like uh, I want to do a quick recap because you've shared a lot. So DUSK has one of its key competitive advantages is you've put in the work, which took years to build a regulatory compliant engine. And you've also built a relationship with all of the regulatory bodies in Europe so that now DUSK is recognized and has the right licenses to enable DUSK to partner with highly regulated financial industries or financial players.
If I may interrupt you, this is
Yeah.
not entirely correct. The
Okay.
one that has got the license is MPEX, the
Is
stock
MPEX.
exchange.
Correct.
So it is MPEX that vouch for DUSK, and this MPEX that gets into all kind of partnership, but imposing the use of DUSK
I see.
in closing these partnerships.
As the key part of the technology stack.
Correct.
Now, in the next little while, in the next 10 minutes or so before we end, I think it's very clear that DUSK has put in the work. It has competitive advantage when it comes to highly regulated industries, especially initially here in Europe. What when people think about DUSK, the token, what can you say about how value accrues to the DUSK token, if people are wondering? Because it's really clear from a partnerships perspective, from a regulatory compliance perspective, DUSK is a clear leader. What can the token in which value can accrue to the token?
Before
Without making any promises, but just
without making any promises.
Yeah.
I have been talking a lot about what DUSK does, but I haven't been touching upon why. I mean, having DLT that does all this and that, right? So why bother? So the vision has always been to give users the capability to run a piece of the infrastructure on top of which financial transactions are cleared and settled and verified and validated. What DUSK is doing is trying to make sure that people like you and me, can participate in the financial market infrastructure. Because at this point in time, the financial market infrastructure are vertically integrated platforms that are in the hands of a few, regulated entities that are actually making a lot of money out of it. What I want is for this to become an horizontal integrated decentralized platform, and I want to provide any user and all people the capability of participating in the operations of the financial infrastructure by running a DUSK node. So in this particular scenario, then the DUSK token accrues value, because in order for any kind of operation to happen on this financial market infrastructure, then essentially you need to have DUSK in order to pay for gas. But that's not the only utility that we have. And by the way, everybody that is running a node stays incentivized exactly with the same kind of mechanism, that incentivizes miners of Bitcoin to, validate, verify transactions and create a block, right? And that is one of the principal utility, but it's not the only one. Our symbiotic relationship with MPEX allows us also to expand on this utility, pretty much in the same way that Binance, for instance, has a symbiotic relationship with BNB, right? So, and that is another way that we are accrue, or that DUSK holders accrue value. At some point, when we are fully at regime in tokenizing assets, in clearing assets, in creating investment opportunities, in getting money and TVL and whatnot, then at that particular point in time, then we are going to turn MPEX also in a Binance for regulated assets. And at that particular point in time, then this unlocks a lot of different other value accruing mechanisms, which are simply inspired by what Binance does with BNB. Just Binance burns BNB depending on the profit that it does. The profit is accrued by all the different kind of trading fees that Binance accrues, plus all the different kind of services that it provides to the Web3 users. We intend to do exactly the same thing, not only for Web3, but also for regulated assets. This is very ambitious, but this is already happening. And this is also the reason why, we have been announcing 2 different partnerships. At the moment, DUSK is one of the few protocols that can issue digital euros. The one that has through Quantos, which is the issuer of EuroQ. So it's a fully MiCA licensed EMT. And if you read the announcement is Quantos, MPEX, and DUSK issue EuroQ. We did we closed the partnership with Cordial Systems. Cordial
Last
System
week.
is last week, and these guys are incredible. They have one of the first zero trust architecture for digital assets, and we are the first to use this zero trust architecture for custody, treasury, and vaults of regulated digital assets. And again, Cordial Systems partners up with DUSK and MPEX. You see where I'm going with this? MPEX is definitely, like I said, has got a symbiotic relationship with DUSK. DUSK is the technology arm, is the decentralized protocol, is the general purpose layer 1, on top of which we also have very sophisticated compliance transaction models that are deployed onto. But we also have a business arm that, in fact, has already penetrated the market and is going to do our bidding in there. And the value for our holders comes from a vast range of different opportunities and possibilities. Everything that is going to happen with Quantos, for instance, is by issuing not really a stable coin, but digital euros that we can create, and we are creating, in fact, is on our roadmap, a payment network. Now, this payment network is going to serve certain specific niche actors with which, by the way, we already have an agreement that we are going to unveil quite soon. And, just having a payment network using the stable coin that, it's already accruing transaction and transaction fees. Now, the capability of doing TVL based on that EMT for a lending protocol, for instance, which is completely securitized, for example, or even a non-secure one. Well, that's Aave business model. That's basically for Curve if you are an OG. MPEX itself provides a Binance-like opportunity for value accrual. The capability of issuing assets and doing primary is interesting. It's still interesting also for us. But what is interesting for us is the capability of actually attracting brokers and attracting market makers to use MPEX as a sort of a B2B venue, trading venue, in order for them to jump all the different kind of costs, to avoid all the different costs that come from the clearance and settlement system, so that there are things like atomic settlement and these kind of things already on the venue. But the brokers and the market makers are essentially going to trade on the venue itself, on tokenized assets, even if they don't even see the tokenization, right? So blockchain is essentially a backend technology that, for the right use cases, like for instance for use cases that do not really pertain to the real world, quote unquote, but when you're dealing with virtualized and digital assets, well, that's explosive, because the costs are not borne by those that make use of these venues. Like I said, it's the vision of DUSK is to make sure that people like you and me, we incur the costs of running the infrastructure, and because of that, we also are incentivized, and we accrue DUSKs to run the infrastructure. So MPEX doesn't really have to pay for this infrastructure. It has to pay for the transactions that go on the infrastructure. But one thing is to pay for a transaction fee, another entirely is to maintain a system that needs to vertically integrate with a lot of different kind of actors and stay compliant at the same time. So we are saving a huge amount of costs for MPEX. So why is MPEX doing this? Well, for this. Because it's extremely convenient for them. They essentially completely had their own technical department outsourced to the community, and still they can provide much better, much cheaper, more efficient services to brokers, market makers, users, issuers, and traders in general, and also asset managers that want to issue and trade their products on the platform. And of course, and this is the last thing I'm gonna say about this overall use case, and then we can probably wrap up. The good thing about this is the fact that DUSK is also non-exclusive for MPEX. We already have relationships with other kind of venues, because the capability of outsourcing the infrastructure to the community, it's not really something that only one exchange, one stock exchange, or one licensed entity is interested in. It's practically everybody is interested in doing that. Of course, we are not going there too fast, because if you are just positioning yourself in the market like the financial market infrastructure for everyone and anyone, doesn't work, right? So you need to have a lighthouse case. You need to prove that our thesis is correct, and then at that particular point in time, by creating an actual business case, an old school business case of PowerPoint saying, well, before DUSK, MPEX was spending 3 million per year, 4 million per year in costs. After DUSK is spending zero. Well, at that particular point in time, when I can do this kind of business cases and present them, then something's gonna happen. Probably I will be shouted up as a snake oil seller or something because it's too good to be true. But essentially, that has been the vision all along.
I think you've shared with us some pretty amazing information about DUSK and the value that DUSK has brought to the financial markets through MPEX in Europe. And I want everyone to know about DUSK. And I think your sharing of knowledge in terms of how DUSK accrues value through the transactions that are made on the network is also really, really valuable. So Emanuele, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. And we look forward to seeing what DUSK is up to in the next little while.
Thank you. It's been really a pleasure to be here.